Hey everybody, this is Erman Moradi with Erman Entourage. Thank you so much for being here. It is June 12th. Today we have a very special guest speaker, Torin Borrowdale. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you all for being here. I know for most of you, you've been with us on Zoom for the last 3 months due to COVID. It's just a way for us to continue networking while we are socially distancing. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Torin Borrowdale, composer for Netflix's Locke Key and other films such as he did Searching, he did Run. A lot of really cool stuff coming up as well. So give it up for Torin Borrowdale.
Hey guys, thanks for being here.
Some quiet claps here. Thank you so much for being here once again, Torin. Before we get into the show, before we get to Locke and Key, I want to get to know you as a composer. I want to know your background, how you got into the industry, because I know everyone has a different pathway into the film industry. So for you, what was it like, and how did you get your start?
Well, I think my musical journey started like a lot of musicians, where I had a mother that forced me to take piano lessons, even though I hated it and hated practicing. But one thing that kind of got me through practice time was kind of improvising my own music and composing my own things. So that was something that kind of made the kitchen timer that she set for practice time go a little bit faster. So I really loved movies and TV growing up. And so like in high school, when I had to choose a career, I realized I could combine both my interests, music and film, and write music for film. And that was always something that appealed to me. Being able to tell stories through music and convey emotion was always appealing. So one of my heroes, James Newton Howard, went to USC. And so that was the university that I wanted to go to. And I was fortunate enough to attend, and I even studied some of his manuscripts are in the library there at USC. And I did or music composition in undergrad. I did a film minor to kind of learn what I could about film, and then I did the film scoring program that they have at USC that they're known for. And I was actually fortunate enough to be mentored by James Newton Howard by the end of it, which was a great experience. And then, after all that, you kind of step out into the real world, and, it's a very daunting place to get your career started. And I did a couple internships and didn't really know what was going to happen. And then I think one of the turning points for me was I worked on this movie called Searching with Aneesh Chaganty, who I'd gone to school with him before, and we did a couple student films and, a commercial for Google together. And then Searching was his first feature, and, it ended up going into Sundance. It ended up getting bought by Sony. And after that, I felt like, the passion I had for film music was really, maybe this was going to work out, and, there was a place for me in this industry. So that's kind of my background and how I got here.
Speaking of Searching, Seb Ohaney, a really cool producer. I know him. And,
yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, really cool guy. So.
Yeah, I mean, and he wrote Searching, and he worked on Run as well as producer and writer for that as well. I mean, he's fantastic. Yeah.
So Locke and Key on Netflix. For those who've seen it, they've expressed how much they love it. The opening theme. Can you talk about your inspiration behind the music for that?
Oh yeah. So I mean, for those of you that have seen the show, I mean, there's so many aspects of the show. Like, it's a horror show, it's a family show, it's a fantasy. For the main titles, I really wanted to just focus on one idea, and that was like, what would it be like to discover these keys for the first time? So, it starts kind of small. It starts with a door slam, and then you're kind of like tiptoeing around the house, like looking for keys, and you find some and you try to figure out what they do, and you realize pretty quickly that, these are really powerful things. And so kind of with the scope of the orchestra, I wanted to express like the limitless possibilities with these keys. So as the main titles progress, it gets really big. We got 40 string orchestra with 13 brass, woodwinds, percussion, soloists, and that kind of expresses everything you could possibly do with these keys. I was really inspired by composers like Debussy, Pour le Piano, Movement Number 1, and the Chopin Etudes. They all feature this kind of like perpetual motion piano figures that kind of go throughout. And so the figure I landed on for Locke Key was this like little trilly idea on the piano that kind of is the basis for the whole thing. And so, bringing it all together with the piano, the orchestra, the percussion, everything, I wanted to create this like really fun sound that, was like rediscovering magic again, and really lean into the funness of it. Another thing I really wanted to do was, a lot of times the main titles is so separate from the rest of the score that, you hear it once and then maybe you hear it at the end of the series. But one way I wanted to integrate it with the rest of the score was to use the main motif, which is G, B flat, G, D, C, those 5 notes. I kind of wanted to embed it as like a hidden key in other scenes of the show. So like when they see Key House for the first time, you hear a legato version of that in the cello, and when they're getting the tour of the house, that theme is actually the bass line. So you wouldn't really hear it, but it's kind of there if you're like looking for it. Just like as the Locks are going through the house, they don't know there's keys all around them, but it's hidden there if they're willing to look for it.
And speaking of orchestra, I played violin myself in orchestra. Wasn't good at it, but I played it. So for you, what was your approach in selecting who to play for the orchestra for the theme song?
Yeah, I mean, with the sound of the orchestra, I started with the source material, like because the story is so rich and there's so many layers to the storytelling and the number of characters. I felt like I really wanted to enhance the complexity by using an orchestra that you can express such deep things, and there's such a wide variety of instruments already in the orchestra that I felt like that was the best way to do that. One thing I didn't want to do is just write the sad piece of music or the adventure piece of music or the horror piece of music and then let the editor kind of place it wherever. I wanted it to really fit each scene organically, and each cue would be like this living, breathing part of the Locke Key world. I also really didn't want to do anything too gimmicky. Like I didn't want to make the violin players play with a key or something silly like that. A concept versus a gimmick. If the concept really works for what the show is and you can translate that into the score, that's when the concept really works. And otherwise I didn't want to make it too gimmicky. And I felt like the best way to use the orchestra was to give the show the kind of this cinematic classic sound that the show could have come out 10 years ago or 10 years from now and it still would make sense. And I did get to work with a bunch of instrumentalists. I mean, the full orchestra it's always a treat when you're able to work with the full orchestra, but to work with the solo piano player and the cello player, like they were phenomenal. And my friend Gina Luciani plays flute, and we actually went to school together at USC. And we worked on a couple student things together, but this was the first time we actually worked together in a professional setting. So it was really fun to collaborate with other professional musicians and really have other people's input.
Awesome. And I love asking composers about their relationships with producers, especially showrunners. So for you, can you talk about what the showrunners gave you, the notes they gave you in terms of how to create, what do they want the sound to be for the show?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, yeah, so Carlton Cuse and Meredith Averill were the 2 showrunners. Carlton Cuse is known for working on the show Lost, which I think most of you have probably heard of. And, that's, one of the pinnacles of great television scoring, because that was scored.
We can hear you. Here you go.
Okay, I'm muted. So, and Meredith Averill worked on The Haunting of Hill House. So they're both very well experienced, and they really wanted the cinematic sound too. And, they selected my demo. So right from the front, we were on the same page about what the score should be. And, Netflix was super supportive as well. They helped provide the orchestra. They let me hire the people that I had worked with before that I wanted to work with. And, really, it was a pretty painless experience overall, and this doesn't always happen. So The notes that we worked on, you know, they were really specific things like, oh, like at the end of the scene, we wish it changed like this, or maybe you don't, maybe hit this part harder, or, you know, this part needs to be scary. Like this wasn't how we wanted to shoot it, or things like that. It was never like, you need to write this whole cue or this whole scene, or like there was never any major issues like that. So it was pretty smooth sailing. Um, I felt like a really integrated team member into the whole experience. You know, and given, you know, the showrunner's history, you know, they've done tens of more shows than I've done, dozens of more shows than I've done. And so I never felt like they didn't value my opinion, and they, you know, another producer I worked with, Raouf Glasgow, he was the post producer, and I worked most closely with him. And I felt like he specifically really gave me the space to succeed. Like he really set me up for success and supported me where I needed it. You know, it was a good experience overall. I mean, and they're so smart. They know exactly what they're looking for. And so it was never an issue of confusion or frustration. It was always, you know, simple suggestions, and, you know, we worked from there. It was a great experience.
Love it. And being that it's a show with different genres, you know, were there any challenges when making the music?
Oh man, I mean, the main challenge for me, I kind of boil it down to this. Like, I'm used to working in film, and generally in film, you've got more time to write the music, and there's generally less music. For Locke Key, there was 4.5 hours of music that we wrote and recorded and mixed and all that. So my big challenge was, how do I put the level of detail into the score that I'm used to putting in on this crazy, ridiculous timeline with so much music to write? So I still treated it like a score, and I still wanted it to be this thing I was proud of. So I worked on it in a couple different ways. First, I started as early as I possibly could, you know, at the script stage, and I really devoured the script. So I understood the story, I understood the characters, like how each of their character arcs goes throughout the season, so that, you know, when I write a theme for Bodhi, I know how it starts and how it ends, and, you know, midway how it's going to be. And that was really important because the recording schedule is crazy. We had 3 recording sessions, and so you have to have all your episodes composed before the recording session, and there's no turning back. Like, it has to be done by that point. And the first recording session, because it got started so early, you know, it felt like we had so much time to work on it and like work through things. And then the second 2, those were like spaced out with half as much time, you know, and it kept getting crunched, and, you know, things were getting moved around with special effects and all that. So it was really important that I knew the music that I wanted to write, so that when it became crunch time, I could just, you know, compose those scenes and not have to come up with the new music, and not have to second guess things, not have to work through things with the producers. And another thing that made it hard was, you know, the show changes so much by the second half. The second half is so much darker than the first half, that there was like no music that we could reuse in these scenes. So it kind of all had to come from scratch. But you know, because Netflix and the showrunners and producers and everything were so supportive, and really let me focus on being able to write the music that I wanted to, I felt like I really had to rise to the occasion, and it was up to me to like write the music that I really wanted to do. And because things went so smoothly, I was able to do that. And, you know, it was really nice when the reviews came out. A lot of them actually mentioned the music, and it was a nice little validating moment where it's, you know, people don't always notice the music, and it's nice when the hard work you're putting into it actually gets noticed. So.
That must feel really good when your music is recognized in a review, a glowing review. That's awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and that's, you know, that's a bonus point. That's never a given thing with music. So it was nice to see that.
Absolutely. And you were talking about working in film as well. So if you can talk about Run, are you able to talk about Run and the music you did for that movie?
Yeah, I mean, so Run, I kind of worked on that before and after Locke Key, and it was completely opposite. I mean, Locke Key's got all these characters, all these different genres, like so much going on, and then Run is really a boiled down story about two people and their interaction for 90 minutes. And so we started out with, it's about a mother and a daughter, and we started out with a theme for both of them. And then we realized that was too many themes. We only needed one theme for their relationship and how it changes throughout the movie. So it's this really great Hitchcock type film. And so I wanted to write like a Bernard Herrmann type score, but kind of give it this modern edge. So what it ended up doing was using Herrmann type chords, but with like modern textures. So we did some really cool things with like ricochet violins and creating these really tense moods with these chords that slowly change over time and things like that. And I mean, working with Aneesh, he's so smart. I mean, if you've seen Searching, you know he's a master at like putting you into the scene and like you feel the suspense. And there's so many great sequences in Run. I really can't wait for people to see it. And you know, I've been working together with Aneesh over the years, and it's been great because he's so like specific on what the music needs to be, and so collaborative in that regard. And you know, really fine-tuning the score to make sure that it's really the best thing that we can put out. So it's always a treat working with him. And you know, Sarah Paulson and Kira Allen do such a great job in the movie. Like I really can't wait for people to see it when it finally hits theaters.
Hopefully sometime soon.
Yeah.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
We look forward to that as well. I do have a few more questions for you on my behalf, but we do have questions coming up in the queue. So we're going to go back and forth if you don't mind. I'm going to call on Raphael first. Raphael, then Mike, then Tosh. Raphael, you're up, sir.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so I had a question. It kind of touches a little bit on what Ron was talking about with the relationship with showrunners and creators. What in your experience is like the best advice you can give to a director or a showrunner for really effectively communicating their vision to the composer and the music team?
That's interesting. Yeah, for Locke Key, I mean, I think what really worked out with our working relationship was that at every step of the way, the showrunners knew what they were trying to achieve. And so if there was a note or a little bit of a scene that I wasn't hitting the mark that they were expecting, they could easily correct it and tell me what it needed to be. And there wasn't any second guessing on, you know, the intent of what was meant to be there. So for a director to really understand what they're trying to communicate, and then recognizing when the music doesn't hit that mark or does hit it, I mean, that's the challenge for anyone that isn't a musician, is how do you communicate that into words? Like what's not feeling right about the scene? And a lot of times, you know, when you use emotional words, like how it makes you feel, rather than trying to get into musical terms, that's when things are more effective.
That makes sense. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Raphael. Up next, we have Mike, followed by Tosh. Mike, you're up.
Hey, Torin, thanks so much for doing this today.
Yeah, of course.
I had a chance to actually see a few of the episodes a while back and actually really enjoyed the music. It really stood out to me, and I ended up taking some notes on it. So I was really impressed by that. So, you know, when I saw this today, I definitely wanted to check it out and
awesome.
Say hi and stuff. But so you touched a little bit about this, and you recorded the orchestra. So I just was asking, like, where did you record it? It sounded like you had 40 string players. Just wanted to hear a little bit about that. And then just additionally, one of the things that really caught me on the show is it was one of the first like 2 or 3 episodes, but there was a really beautiful flying sequence when he kind of like takes off, and I think he meets like one of his family members and stuff. But that was really special. I mean, it really stood out for like, you know, orchestral TV show and stuff. And I'd love to maybe talk through that a little bit about just, you know, what you were influenced by or how that came together. Did it flow really easily? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a treat to work with an orchestra. We did 3 recording sessions in Eastern Europe, and I mean, so that flying sequence specifically, like, you know, that's one of those dream scenes that really doesn't come along very often, where it's really musically driven. It's really high spirited, and the music can really, you know, fill the scene and make it as exuberant as it needs to be. while you're in school, like at USC, we got, I forget, I think like 14 minutes with an orchestra to record one 90-second cue. And so this was kind of like that sort of 90-second cue that I would have loved to do in school. So it was great to, take that experience from school and really, put it into a project that I felt passionately about. And yeah, it's there's something about using live musicians. I mean, mock-ups in general these days are sounding really good, and a lot of times, like, I'm happy with how it sounds, and then when I hear the real strings play, it's like, oh well, that's nothing compared to, the live players, what I had before. So I mean, whenever you can use live players, I think it's always a positive thing for sure.
It sounded like you recorded a lot of the long strings and stuff and the really emotional music as well, that really makes it flow better, or just you
Yeah,
get
I mean,
away.
yeah, it helps, especially the long strings, because the transitions for MIDI doesn't always work well. Whereas, when it's real players, they really nail the chords, they really nail the transitions, and it's that extra bit of emotionality that the real players add that, I mean, you can't mock it up. So yeah, it's always nice to have a full orchestra at your disposal.
Was it Budapest that you recorded?
Yeah, it was Budapest. Yeah.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much, Mike. Good to see you. What's that behind you? Is that like sound equipment?
It's a modular rig. I got some synthesizers and stuff, and
So cool.
being creative. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Up next, we have Tosh, then Tiffany Joy, and then Justine. Tosh, you're up.
Yo, it's poppin', Torin. I'm back. Yo. So my question, bro. So what is your process behind scoring a film?
Mm-hmm. Process behind scoring a film. So that's a good question. So like for Run, I'll talk about Run since I just mentioned it before. It's all about figuring out what is the concept of the film. What are you trying to express musically that the film is about? So first, that starts with boiling down the film to its essence. What are you trying to express, and then how can you translate that into music? So with Run, the two things we wanted to do was make it a Hitchcock thriller, and kind of express how a mother-daughter relationship could start out well and can kind of fall apart. And so it was really how do you express that with music. And yeah, one of the ways we did that was with the string textures I mentioned earlier. As things kind of fall apart in their relationship, the strings get much more agitated. It gets much more crazy as things go along. And so you might not notice it as you're watching the film, but hopefully you feel it, and it kind of goes along with the narrative as it goes. So I think, just mainly trying to boil the film down to its essence, and then, I like to also map out things as best I can. So once you've got the essence of what you're trying to express, then you can like look at each scene and see how does this scene individually express that thing at this point of the narrative. And that's where it gets kind of complicated, but in my head, it's where it makes things clear, because you're not trying to guess what the scene is expressing, because you have in your mind where it fits into the narrative. Did that make sense?
Yeah. That makes sense, because like one thing I noticed is like the theme with Locke Key, you start with the piano and then the strings, but then the drums just blindsides you, and I find that gangster, bro.
Yeah, that was part of the demo that I submitted that they really liked. I thought the drums, someone gave me this advice. One of my all-time favorite composers, John Powell, said that just write big themes, write bold themes, like just go for it. Like, and so when I was writing the Locke Key main titles, it was like, what'll sound great on this is just adding a drum beat to it. I grew up playing drums, so that's very comfortable for me. And I was like, I might have second guessed myself and thought that was too much, but I just decided to go for it. So that's John's Pell influence on me. So
Yeah, I tell you, shit work, man. Yeah, appreciate you, man. And just want to shout out USC. That's my college football team. So I'm a Trojan.
Thanks, man.
Much love, bro.
Thank you so much, Tosh. Up next, we have Tiffany Joy, followed by, I think it's Justine. So Tiffany Joy, you're up.
Hey, Torin, it's a pleasure to meet you and to speak with you. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I think we lost Tiffany. 1 second. Hey, Tiffany, you there? No worries. We'll go back to Tiffany. Let's go ahead and do. Oh, Tiffany, you there?
Yeah.
Hey,
we
lost you for a second. Here we go. We're back.
Okay.
We're back.
All right. Sorry. So, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. My question was for practical purposes. How many changes are you willing to make, like in your contract?
I think I got the gist. You cut out again, but I think I got the gist of the question. Number of changes is always a tricky thing because it really depends on the project, and it's kind of hard to quantify like how many changes are necessary, because at the end of the day, you just want to write the best score that you can possibly write, and sometimes that takes a lot of revisions. Sometimes it comes a lot easier than that. So it helps when it's kind of spelled out in the contract, or like where everyone's on the same page in terms of expectations on how many notes are going to happen. So on Locke Key, because we had such strict deadlines, it really was kind of made for us. Like we only had a couple revisions, and everyone was so much on the same page already about what the score should be, that the revisions, that never presented an issue. There's other projects where it just takes more time, especially with film, when you've got a little more time and you can really nail down certain things, where it does take more revisions. But a lot of the times, it's just part of the gig, and you have to do what's best for the film. And a lot of the times that's, doing more revisions than you would have liked. So hopefully that was the question. We only heard the beginning of it, but I think that was pretty much it.
Yeah, I think so. You're good. Up next, we have Justine Demoye, then Sophia. Justine, you're up.
Hi, nice to meet you. Hi, so my question is, if there is somebody wanting to get into composing for film and television, and let's say, could you describe what kind of things you would have liked to have known back when you started, like some of the practical things, like TV, you have a lot shorter time, film you have more time, like things like that, that could have prepared you better mentally, maybe even like practical things like this is how I would have negotiated my contract, or different things that would be helpful to anybody jumping into this.
Okay, that's a good question. Let me think about it. So I think when I was dreaming of becoming a film composer, my idea of what it would be like is different than it was in reality. I think film music tends to get kind of glamorized and seem to be really awesome, when most of the time it's not. And I think honestly, Locke & Key was one of the projects where I thought it was as great as it could have been. So I can't say too many good things about this experience, but it is certainly the exception. And I think for me, my first internship out of school, I worked for a composer named Christopher Lennertz out of his studio. And I felt like that experience really gave me what the real world was like. Working in a studio, working with directors, how multiple composers work out of the same studio, things like that. It just kind of opened my eyes to how things are actually done. And those are the sort of things you don't always get in school. So, as much real world experience as you can get, because I think when you're deciding to become a composer, it's, you know, you're following your dreams, you're following your passion, and and that's all great, but a lot of times things are different.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Like you said, you know, it was more glamorous and, you know, the real world wasn't. Like, what do you mean by some of the
I
things?
guess,
Like,
yeah, like the opportunities that you get, like when I was at school at USC, and then I did the ASCAP film scoring workshop right after. Both of those programs, you get a full orchestra, and then you're out in the real world doing student films and doing small budget things, and you know, you're lucky if you have a budget to record a couple musicians. So you feel very over prepared. You feel like you don't get the opportunities to really expand your wings and show the world what you can do. So I think that was a wake up call that I got right out of school. Was, you know, just because you're qualified to write this music doesn't mean that, you know, directors are going to be knocking on your door giving you opportunities left and right. So I think that was the biggest reality check for me. Yeah. Anything more specifically? I feel like I'm answering it kind of vaguely. Is there anything specific I can answer about that?
just how did you go about getting your first opportunity? And if somebody here Torch on this thing, he's probably going to get some opportunities soon, and anything specifically that would help, you know, navigate some of these situations.
Yeah, I think for me, the best thing I got out of school was not my musical knowledge or anything like that. It was the relationships I made with the filmmakers that went to school there as well. So any way that you can meet filmmakers, because those relationships are really important to maintain. You know, I wouldn't have done the Searching Project if I hadn't, you know, done Aneesh's student films before that. And I knew him, you know, 4 or 5 years before his feature film came. So any way that you can find relationships like that, you know, and that's hard because, you know, in school is a good place. Networking events are a good place, but it's hard to find those connections and really maintain them. But those are the things that are really powerful when you first start your career.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Justine. Always good to have you on here. Up next, we have Demoye, Sophia. Then actually, we're going to bring it back to Tiffany. She had a second part of the question. So Demoye, Sophia, then back to Tiffany.
Awesome. Well, hi, Torin. Thank you so much for being all the gems and the wisdom. I just want to say that I, too, prefer live instruments for scoring films and recording in general, but I was just wondering if you had any preferences for any plugins that you use for film scores, like for certain strings or different percussion sounds and things like that, or other plugins that you use to like edit the textures of those sounds.
Sure.
Like
That's a good question. I mean, I think my template, which I'm redoing right now, orchestrally, it's got a section from different libraries. I think the main strings I use are Lass strings. A lot of the ones I've been getting into are Spitfire. They've got a lot of great strings textures. The percussion is really good for like orchestral percussion. Things like that are the main. Those are the ones I can really recommend. Woodwinds are harder. I mean, I use VSL for woodwinds. Those have always been really good. But yeah, when you're able to replace them with the real thing, you know, that's always what you strive for.
all right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Demoye. Up next, we have Sophia, back to Tiffany, then Medette. Sophia, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Sophia. It's nice to meet you.
Nice
Thank
to
you
meet
for
you,
being
Sophia.
here.
Yeah, thanks.
I was wondering, is there a particular film genre or some other element of a movie that makes the project more compelling to you?
Interesting. The like film genres specifically, like what am I looking for specific genres?
Not necessarily, but is there something about a project that would make you very interested about it? Like maybe it's the characters or the setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think anything that can kind of spark creativity, whether that's like the interesting use of instruments or like exotic things or like some conceptual thing you can do. There was a pitch for a demo that I got from my agent recently that was a type of show that was, you can watch it in a different order. So it doesn't have to be chronological, which as a composer, like that kind of sets off ideas in your head. Like, oh, how could I take that concept and translate it to score?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really anything that can spark an idea, especially something conceptual like that, where you've got an opportunity to do something interesting with the music.
Got it. And what would you consider the most difficult part of composing?
The most difficult part of composing, probably like that feeling where you know what it needs to be, and then you hear the music that you've written, and you're like, why doesn't this sound like what it should be? That's one of those things that, you know, as a musician, you know, usually you can pinpoint what's wrong with it, but sometimes it's a frustration for you and the director when, you know, you can't quite figure out what's wrong with it. And you know, and that's where the revisions come in, where you have to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
find a different approach. And sometimes it's tweaking one thing, sometimes it's rewriting the whole cue. You know, I found a lot of times either the solution is to just try something completely different and then see if that works. And usually if you go down the rabbit hole of like doing revision after revision and like it's still not quite right, a lot of times it's actually the first thing you came up with that is usually either the right answer or a lot closer than what you ended up with. So those are kind of some of the tricks you get to get out of situations like that where you don't know what to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Sophia, you're all the way in Europe, right?
No, I'm still here. I'm in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. My bad that you're all the way
Yeah.
in Europe. Thanks for being here, nonetheless. Up next, we're going to bring it back to Tiffany Joy. Tiffany Joy had a second part of the question. So Tiffany Joy, then Medet.
Hey, okay, I'm so sorry. We'll try this again. So I actually have a second part of the question, but if you could just like briefly recap my other question, because I totally missed it. It just shut down. Yeah, how do you decide on how many changes you're willing to do practically?
It's per project, like what makes sense. And sometimes you can put that into the contract, but a lot of times it's just whatever makes sense with your working relationship with that director, because you don't want it to be a hindrance where, you know, you want to always do what they're willing. You want to be willing to do what they're asking, because you want to arrive at the best solution possible. So, you know, to put that in the way where you're like, well, I'm not going to do any more revisions unless you pay me more money or things like that. You know, that's where like a business thing can kind of get in the way of creativity. So it's kind of project by project. Hopefully that summarized it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was thinking too, because like I can understand how it would also cause like friction business-wise, in a business relationship, you know, because you're both wanting the best product, but like by a person saying, no, I've already made like so and so many changes. I see how they can like start conflict between the two, but at the same time, just you know, when someone keeps coming to you over and over and over again, they're like, it's just not right. I just was wondering kind of when the no means no thing, but you're saying it depends.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, and you know, if there's issues like that keep coming up, then sometimes it's, you know, up to me to figure out what they're actually wanting. If they're saying we want this is what the temp score is, but that's not exactly what we want. Sometimes it's up to them and me to figure out what are they actually saying. Yeah, it really depends, because you know, and there's also a lot of influences on the final product. Like there's a lot of producers, if there's a studio involved, that's a whole nother thing that, you know, the director might not even agree with these notes that they're giving you. So like there's things like that always come up. So you really have to just be flexible and let things like that roll off your back most of the time, because if you let them get the best of you, then yeah, it can get in the way of your relationship.
Okay. And then kind of going off of that, like you were saying that sometimes you kind of have to figure out in your own way if the directors are not really conveying properly and they keep getting you to change it. You have to kind of figure out your own what they're wanting. How do you decide on the specific instruments and so on? Someone may have already asked this, I don't know, but like if you have if that input from the director is not working, how do you decide on those instruments? Do you like have a steadfast rule that you jump into, or are you willing to experiment more in like uncharted waters?
Yeah, I mean, usually that's a good time to like experiment if things aren't kind of coming across. I think generally when I'm hearing notes from a director, no matter if they're saying, oh, you need to use like a guitar, make it really fast here, or get faster, get louder. I'm kind of translating what they're saying, usually, hopefully emotionally, translating that into something that I can translate into music. Because if they start giving you specific musical directions, that's where things don't always like the idea of an ostinato means something different to a composer as it does to a director. A director might think it's just something fast or just strings or have a slight misunderstanding of what something means. So it's really key to like understanding like the intent behind why they're saying something. And usually it has to do with the drama happening on screen. If they want something to feel more exciting, then you write music that feels more exciting. And if they say do a cymbal swell, you don't necessarily have to do that specifically, just as long as it conveys that same idea. So I guess it's more translating emotional ideas into music. That's the best way.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry for the problems, but thank you for your patience.
Glad we can get through it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Up next, we have Medat from Montreal.
Yes, hello, Torin. So my question for you: how important do you think it's to do mentorships with A-listers? Do you think it's the best way to get out of the indie scene onto higher end projects, especially when you're doing? I mean, you know, the conditions, they're not always great. People are not always being treated well and not always being credited for their work. So, do you think that's the only way, at least, to transition out of the indie scene?
It's tough. I think, you know, if you look at any composer that's, you know, A-list composer and their story, they pretty much all have different backgrounds and how they got to where they are. So there's no like one track to get there. I think, you know, I do really recommend having at least some internship. It doesn't have to be like some brutal experience for you, but just to understand how the industry works, I think is beneficial. I mean, I made the decision early on after I graduated that I wasn't going to be a composer assistant. I just wanted to try to make my name for myself as a composer. And, you know, and that was just a personal choice that I made. And I think with, you know, the success of Search, you know, that's what made that route possible. But, you know, there's so many valuable things to be learned from an A-list composer. I mean, like I was mentored by James Newton Howard, but I didn't work with him on a daily basis for months on end. And if, you know, if I had that experience, I would have picked up on a lot more little things that he did. And, you know, those sort of things that you can't really teach, that you just kind of observe and incorporate into your own work. So, I mean, I think having a good balance, like it's not absolutely necessary to really do anything. Like, you know, getting into pop music, you know, is also a good avenue into becoming a composer. Like there's plenty of different ways. And I think just finding what makes most sense for you. I think that's all I can really say.
Thank you for that. Torin, we're almost out of time, so the next few questions are kind of like speed round, if you will. So the next one is when you get into a creative block, how do you get out of it? What inspires you?
Oh, good question. I think just reconnecting with my main instrument, which is piano. I think that's as long as it's, you know, a melodic thing that I'm trying to come up with, that's what really inspires me to write a new theme, or, you know, get out of a little funk. Because when you spend your whole world inside the computer landscape, you kind of go and do the things you've always done. So I think returning to your home instrument is usually a good way to get out of writer's block.
Amazing. And somebody also wants to know, are you planning to do score for animation anytime soon? Is that something you're interested in?
I would love to. I've done a lot of animation shorts. I'm looking into doing more animation. I mean, because I hopefully you can see from Locke Key, like I do really like that colorful sound that lends itself so well to animation. So, I mean, yeah, I'd love to do more animation. That's for sure.
Amazing. And lastly, Torin, if you don't mind, there might be a few people on here who are fresh out of college or they're new to composing. What is something they can do to get on the radar of people in the industry? What can they do now while quarantined so that when we're out of quarantine, they're good to go, they're ready to go?
Yeah, I think working on your music and your craft and getting some sort of demo that you can show people. You know, when I worked on the How to Train Your Dragon TV show a couple years ago, and I worked really hard on the demo for that. And you know, when it came time to present it to someone to get hired to write for the show, you know, I had like this full polished demo. So figure out if there's a specific genre you want to do. Make sure you've got something really tangible and really concrete that you can share with someone that will showcase your work in the best possible way.
Amazing. Torin, it's been such a pleasure. Before we go, can we get your social media pages? If anything you want to share, any pages you want to share with us?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, Instagram, I think it's Borrowdale Torin. I think Twitter's Torin Borrowdale. Just search for Torin Borrowdale. It should come up on whatever platform you're looking for. So, and torinborrowdale.com is the website. So, of
course, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Torin Borrowdale. Hopefully, when you search him, he's the only one who shows up. So, Torin, it's been such a pleasure. I love your energy, man. Love speaking with you. Hopefully, we see more of you very soon.
Oh, thank you